All right. Well, thanks so much for coming to join us, both Linda and Mishti. For quick background, we've had so much momentum on the town hall series where we were discussing with authors that we decided we wanted to get back on the live stream with this beta tool and start sort of discussing with other people in our networks who have interesting stories and some of it is written already and some of it is just sort of top of mind kind of from personal experience. So this is a new tool we're using right now, so please feel free to give us feedback. We're still working out some kinks. You can DM us at Highlight Ideas on Twitter, or you can send us an email at hello@highlighter, and we'll try to get anything resolved.
Yeah, and I'm really excited for the topic today. It's kind of fun because I'm usually used to being co-host with DK, but I get to be in the guest seat too this time. But the topic is basically how to create your dream job, which could be a new job. It could be how to make the job you're in more fulfilling to yourself. I think it all just centers on like how to create meaningful work experiences. And I mean, I think that's like really important for having a meaningful life in general and applicable to anyone, like no matter how old you are or what kind of line of work you're in. I think figuring that out is really like the crux of a lot of our lives. So I'm excited to kind of jam on that. And I hope that everyone definitely like chimes in with questions or their own experiences, because I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience that I know have things to say.
Yeah. Great. So quick note on format. The magic here works if we keep it really participatory. So you can add ideas or questions in the chat, and we'll either read the questions directly or invite you up on stage. And you can upvote other posts that you like. So if you see questions other people ask that you're into, you can just click the upvote. And FYI, this is on the record, including the chat, so the people who couldn't make it tonight can learn from the discussion too. And by the way, please make sure you're using Chrome on desktop. So as beta software, we have a few kinks to work out, but it works really in a much more polished way on Chrome on desktop. So if you can get to that, that's what we'd recommend. Before I get started with the intros of our two featured guests, I wanted to first pose a question to the chat room, and I'd like to hear anybody, anybody can chime in and post your thoughts on this. So we're talking about careers tonight, and so we want to try to think through who has had the most profound impact on your personal career so far, and how did you first meet that person? So that's the question for the chat. So feel free to chime in on chat and let us know about those people and kind of that profound impact. And so now I want to turn to a friendly intro for our featured guests, Linda and Mishti. First, I'm going to intro Linda. Now, I would bet that Linda doesn't recall the very first time we met, because she was already a little bit internet famous as a writer. You don't remember this, right?
Curious Conversations?
No, actually it was before that. So in 2017, I was becoming more curious about, I was already understood Bitcoin pretty well and following along, but I was curious about sort of the other cryptocurrencies that kind of were coming up and people were talking about more. And Linda wrote this great guide of kind of beginner's guide to Monero, and beginner's guide to Ethereum, and beginner's guide to a bunch of different cryptocurrencies. So I was at Consensus at a cocktail party, 2017, New York, and we had a mutual friend, Jeremy, who was VP of product, I think, at Coinbase.
Yeah, that was my boss.
Okay, so we connected at that cocktail party. Yeah, he's a friend of my wife, so he was at our wedding, and yeah, we know him. So yeah, I sort of originally met you through your writing, and I think there's actually a lesson to be had in that. It's worth thinking about more broadly, which is like exposing yourself to serendipity through getting your ideas out there. I think that was an interesting opportunity where we ended up connecting, and of course you don't remember it because I was just like some random crypto curious person, and you were
2017 crypto was like
famous.
I forget all of it now.
So Linda started her career as a risk analyst at AIG before transitioning to the startup world as an early product manager at Coinbase. And Linda's now managing Scalar Capital, which is one of the top crypto hedge funds. So she's sort of, great example of going from a more traditional kind of corporate finance job to a startup job to kind of carving her own path with her own firm. So a lot of relevant experience to talk through there. And then Mishti, Mishti is an interesting one where I met Mishti over burritos one night in the Mission. I was hanging out with a group that my wife organized called Renaissance Collective, and she brought together a bunch of interesting generalists who are interested in tech to come together and sort of just hang out and meet people and talk about ideas. And so, it turned out that Mishti and I were sitting next to each other and talking about a bunch of different startup ideas. And then Mishti followed up with a bunch of ideas about the startup that we're working on here at Highlighter. And it actually turned out to be, just a really great kind of a bunch of ideas that we exchanged, and kind of one thing led to another. And you can read through Mishti's post that's kind of now gone viral about the 50 emails that landed my dream job. And that sort of tells the story of how we connected after burritos. And actually now we work together every day. So again, kind of, about writing on the internet. And I think there's a lot of lessons in what we want to talk about tonight that are, talked about there. So, I think now that we have a little bit of the framing for each of your career arcs, I'd like to ask what was the pivotal moment or transition in your career arc? And so when you think through, moving from one org to another or within an org to a new role, is there a certain moment that was really pivotal in changing, the trajectory or kind of opening your eyes to a new way of thinking about kind of your career or, your progress? And I can go either way, whoever would like to jump in.
I'm happy to talk about that. Definitely the most pivotal moment for me was making the jump from a traditional company to a startup. I had wanted to go in finance for a while and kind of climb my way up the corporate ladder. Interned at AIG 2 summers, joined them as an analyst, was like on track to just do that. And I was really nervous about making that jump just because I didn't have much support from the traditional finance space, because they're like, what are you doing? Like, this is insane. It's a startup. Like, you have no guarantee around this. And also Bitcoin, like, they thought was shady back then. So yeah, that was like a really difficult moment. And I spent a lot of time thinking about what my career would look like, because I also wasn't doing finance in my role at Coinbase. And so it was that feeling of having to start over. And I remember just getting to Coinbase. I was really excited, but it was a complete like culture shock for me. Like, I got there and like people were just super relaxed. Like, you didn't have to worry about hierarchy. You could talk to anybody and give ideas. And I wasn't used to that. Like, I was very much used to like everything always has to go through your manager and their manager. And I mean, AIG had like tens of thousands of people, so you just don't know everybody either. So that was a really pivotal moment in my career. And I think like what I really learned was being comfortable kind of sharing my ideas with anyone, and being very open to like feedback and ways that we can improve things. And so I ended up like kind of coming out of my shell a lot at Coinbase in the early days, being okay, like making, just suggestions on how this can be a better company, and because we're all in it together. Whereas like a traditional company, kind of a bit more of a cog in a machine, and you kind of just try to do the best with what you're told. And so that was a very different mind shift for me.
Was that something that was explicitly nurtured at Coinbase, or just like when you showed up, you kind of got the lay of the land and you understood the vibe of how things work?
It's specifically nurtured. Like Brian specifically wants people to be founders coming out of Coinbase. And I think that's why you see so many people come out and start their own companies. Like, I had no intention actually ever in my life to start something of my own. And it was really because Brian wanted you to like challenge like just what's happening, and to just always try to look for improvements, and have ownership in everything from like start to finish. So it's not just like, hey, here's an idea, and then like expect someone else to run with it. Like, you propose an idea, you like follow it through and make it happen. And so like, I think it's just that kind of culture that they really nurtured was really important. That's like kind of why you see that Coinbase mafia.
Mm-hmm. And when you transitioned from AIG to Coinbase, did you already have like a personal connection to somebody at Coinbase, or did you see a job posting that looked relevant, or how did you actually
so I had followed Bitcoin for a while, but I was like super suspicious about this actually becoming mainstream. And I just had heard of Coinbase before. This was in 2014 when I saw Overstock announced that they were accepting Bitcoin as payment. And that was, to me, like the pivotal moment in Bitcoin's history up until then, just because it was like the first mainstream company to even touch Bitcoin. And I saw that Coinbase was offering that service, and it really like gave me an idea in my head, like, wow, this is actually something that could go mainstream if a company like this can onboard all of these like legitimate people and companies. And then I just like looked at the like company page, like all the team members, like did my research on them, and I was like, wow, this is like a really credible team. So I went online and I saw that there were just like no relevant job openings for me, like just nothing finance. Like they didn't hire finance until like, I feel like 2 years after I joined. And so that would have been a long wait. And so I just applied for this like kind of like almost engineering role at first. And I just like was like, whatever, I'm just going to get in there.
Did you have somewhat of like an engineering, did you pose as if you had?
No, I didn't pose anything. I just, I just was like, I want them to just see my cover letter. So I applied for this super analytical role, who the person who ended up getting hired for it was an engineer. So it was definitely like what they were looking for. Right. And I just like got my foot in the door, and I wrote like what I think at the time was a really strong cover letter, just showing my passion for Bitcoin and what I believe this can be, and then why I thought Coinbase was like the company to take it mainstream. And then I like really emphasized like, hey, like I actually have a really good career trajectory at AIG, and I'm not searching for any roles. Like this is the only company that I'm applying for and willing to change like what I want to do. So I thought it was a strong cover letter at the time. Looked back on it like recently, and I was like, oh, like there's a lot I would have changed there. I sound a little like intense, but yeah, that was, I just cold like applied online, and they specifically said it was a cover letter that really got them interested. And they the recruiter actually said that she shared it with Brian and Fred, the co-founders of Coinbase.
Oh, wow.
Because it was like such a passionate letter. And I was like, wow, like this, they actually like know who I am now. And so then they said, obviously this role is like not a fit, but like, are you open to other roles? And I was like, I would do like anything. And so a couple months later, they reached out with like a regulatory compliance investigator role. And I was just like, I don't even know what that is, but like, I'll take it. And so that's kind of how I ended up joining Coinbase. So yeah.
Right. And you sort of talked about having this at AIG. I think you were talking about more of a career trajectory. You sort of had something planned, or maybe there was a process for how you would grow there. And did it feel like at Coinbase, were you looking for that, or you kind of had already, by the time you were joining, you already knew that was not, you didn't want to have that necessarily laid out, and you were going to be more open to serendipity at that point?
I didn't want it laid out. For me, it was most important. And I know like everyone has different thoughts on this, but for me, it was most important to be working at a company I was really passionate about and an industry I was really passionate about, and then working with people I really enjoyed working with. So that was like the ultimate goal. And I was kind of like, I'll just, because it's a startup, like I'll do whatever is needed of me. So I kind of I ended up having 4 different roles actually at Coinbase. And I kind of just moved around constantly. And so like I actually fell into product also, because like it was when Olaf left to start Polychain, they were like, hey, Olaf's leaving. Do you want to just take his role? And I was like, okay, sure. Like I don't really know like what a product manager does, but like I'll do it. Like it was kind of just like willingness to just help the company grow. That was always like my mentality going into it.
Yeah, that's really cool. Also, when you were, do you think there's certain things that you did when you were at Coinbase that kind of made you the person that they asked to take that role, like that showed that you were really into it and really committed and like actually just really cared about the company and were flexible on what you were doing?
Yeah, for sure. I like, there are distinct things that I did.
That's kind of what Nate was asking too. Jinx.
Oh yeah. There are distinct things I did that it wasn't like intentional, like I want to signal to them. It was kind of just like, these are the things I want to do. So so when I was a compliance investigator, a lot of the work was manual. Like you were just like doing the same repetitive work over and over. And I was like, this is like ridiculous. Like I'm not interested in just doing repetitive work. And I feel like there's such good talent at Coinbase. Like, why are we having people do this? So I started writing like all of these like specs basically of like how we can improve the system. And I was like, okay, it's going to save like, if we build this, it's going to save like X number of hours per day for these people, like across, like X number of teammates. And and it would take and I would estimate like how many engineering hours it would take, just because I needed something to show the engineers. So then I would beg my engineering friends at the company to build it for me. This was completely off the roadmap, and I was like, please, look how many hours this saves. And I would tap into their desire to make things more efficient, and and so I built a ton of products this way that ended up saving a ton of time, and never had to do that manual work again. And I think that, a bunch of people were watching this, and I think that they were like, this is actually something that we do need in the company, across all the different departments. And so that's how I ended up becoming product manager for internal tools. So I basically did that role, but across the different departments. And so that was distinctly what I did that people saw I could maybe move to different roles.
Yeah, I like that story, because I feel like, having seen a bunch of different companies over the years and seeing a bunch of different people's career paths, I do find that people who are able to sort of marshal internal resources to accomplish something that the company wants is almost like the very best way to create magic at a company, instead of sort of either, waiting to be told, or trying to join a entrepreneurial, innovation group within a company. I think just finding the people who are passionate about something is a theme that seems to just, repeat again and again. So I'm glad that you were able to share that.
Yeah, and it also relates to what George kind of was saying in the chat, which, do you want to kind of unmute and ask what you were thinking? I think it ties into what Linda was saying about the power of writing and communication.
Yeah, sure. First of all, super jazzed to be joining you guys, because I found both of your stories to be super inspirational. So both kudos for having hustle to do it. And I'm really happy for you guys. But the question I had for you guys is that the reason why I actually think your stories were so interesting is that you guys basically used a one-to-many communication channel, which is writing on the internet, to create luck for yourself, serendipity, and branding, right, which is pretty cool. So do you guys still feel that the best communication channels to do that right now is still writing? Or is it something else? Is it live streaming? Is it podcasting? Is it YouTube videos? And for those communication channels that you feel are most effective, what do you think are the best platform and tools? Is it Twitter? Is it Substack? Is it Medium? There's a little addendum to this as well, which I've actually been thinking about this issue as well. And I think we are in a unique niche that enables this to happen, because I think in Silicon Valley, social mobility is more mobile than in any other sector, in any other place in the world. So I think it allows a lot of these things to be built up very quickly, and for reputations and brand serendipity to happen. But yeah, would love to just get your guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks for the question, George.
I think what I was thinking is what's really powerful is when you can just find a way to connect with someone. And I think writing is just a very easy way to do it, because you could just DM someone on Twitter or send them a cold email. But the cool thing about podcasting and live streaming and things like what we're doing right now, honestly, the promise of those could be, you could just be a curious person who wants to do an interesting interview series, and you don't have to start with big shot people, but I'm sure you could find really interesting operators at lesser known companies or something, and ask them, send them a thoughtful note with questions that you have, bring them on a live stream or on a podcast, and then you've created such an interesting kind of bond with them, but also are using their audiences in a way to get your ideas out there. So it's probably less done, but I think that has a lot of promise. For example, after I wrote that career blog post, I actually got an email being would you want to turn this into a book or something? And then I was like, whoa, just from having this blog post out there. But the approach that I feel would be great if I ever did want to turn something like that into a book would be to have lots of conversations like this with people who have done interesting things in terms of creating their own careers, and have interesting perspectives on this question. And you could have 10 really interesting, deeply thought out blog posts, and then maybe it becomes a book. Or maybe the new form of a book is some interesting multimedia collection of videos and blog posts or something. So yeah, I think the multimedia thing seems like it has a lot of promise. Personally, I just used a lot of writing, but also to your point on is this kind of just a thing that can be used in Silicon Valley? So I also do a lot of like personal creative writing, and ever since I realized that this kind of thing could work, like you could actually DM someone and they would respond, or like cold email someone and some people would respond, and that would just unlock so much. I started doing that. Probably like the most people that I DM cold or cold email, like this week I sent a bunch of these, are just people who've written like essays or books that I really like. So kind of in like the arts or literary world. And it's also really effective. I've found like I get a lot more responses than I would ever think. And now these people are kind of attuned to your work and they'll be reading it, or they might follow you on Twitter. So I definitely think that maybe like industries where people have kind of like a public communal presence are best primed for it. So I mean, I guess a lot of like journalists and writers use Twitter, and so do tech folks. It might be harder in something that's like an industry that's way more traditional and less online.
I think that's one of the promises of some of what can now be done on the internet, though, is that it doesn't have to be a purely Silicon Valley, San Francisco phenomenon. That like these tools actually enable those same kinds of networks to propagate far and wide, so that the whole planet can be connected, and much more opportunity from everywhere can sort of all of the access networks can sort of be more available to anybody with an internet connection, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that like podcast idea with like talking to operators. I feel like at least in the crypto industry, like it's like the same people like on every podcast, and like they say the same things, like how'd you get into crypto and like where are things headed. And like I feel like there's such a great opportunity like within each industry to like create content around like people who just are like in the weeds of like doing something that others find really interesting, and they don't have to be this like super like followed account or anything, but as long as they're giving really useful advice and are interesting people to talk to, I think that's a great way to like kick off a podcast. I'd love to see that personally. And I think it really varies, by industry. Like I know that like LinkedIn is actually like really useful for a lot of people, and like depending on the industry too. So like I know in like finance, that's like where like a lot of my friends, like they still are just like, that's where the vast majority of networking is, and they're not like focused on Twitter like whatsoever. But I mean, for Silicon Valley, I think Twitter has been a really good way, and similar to what Mishti said, like I think DMs are just one of the most powerful things. Like I ended up just like, I mean, most of my connections in Silicon Valley honestly are from just DMs. Like when I was starting my fund, like I just started DMing like Coinbase's investors, and I was just like, I'm leaving Coinbase. Like, I'd love to chat. Like, let me know if you would be open to hearing about like what I'm thinking about for like a crypto fund or something like that. And like they're just really responsive, because they like just they either like already like care about crypto, or they like follow you, or like you already have some sort of resume like on Twitter, because they can see like your thoughts or your background. Yeah. So I found that really valuable. And I still like, I think it's important to just like do what works best for you. Like what's your strength? Because like for me, my strength is definitely not like audio video format, even though that's what we're doing right now. Like I think a lot better at writing. And so that's what I find is the most scalable for me. But I know there are some people who are like insanely good at producing like audio video content, and like they should like double down on that. So for me, writing was really scalable just because I could just share my thoughts, and there's a huge demand for just educational content in general. So like if there's like some topic or industry that people just like, oh man, like I have so many questions about, or like I don't even know where to start, like there's so much like opportunity for writing blog posts about this. And a trick is to like get prominent people in the industry to like you can DM them and just be like, hey, like I wrote this post, like would you be willing to review it and let me know if there's anything that needs to be changed, or if you have any feedback for me? Because then they'll like read this, either give you feedback, make it a better post, or sometimes even have it on their radar, so they'll like share it too in their network. So that was like a kind of this like way of kind of reaching like a different audience than what I already had. So I found that really valuable to be able to do it that way. And am I like like super large.
Oh,
right now.
you're a featured guest. You're
um, I think when I first wrote my Medium post, so it was Beginner's Guide to Ethereum. What ended up happening was I had so many friends and like colleagues that were like, "Hey, could you just explain Ethereum to me?" Like this was like the early days of it, and I would say the same thing over and over, and I found it just being really repetitive, and I hate like repetition. So I just like decided to do a presentation on it at Coinbase. So I was like, hey, like anyone who wants to know this, like I'm actually just going to give like a talk on it. And that ended up being quite popular. And so I was like, okay, like maybe this could be in like a blog post format. And I had a lot of people like Dan Romero. He was really, really nice about convincing me that I could do something like this, because I was really nervous to put my thoughts out there. I was like, what if all these like people attack me and say like things I'm writing are wrong or blah blah blah? And they were just like, no, like put yourself out there, like this content's actually like valuable. And so wrote that and ended up doing well, and I started writing more. So it's I think the scariest part is like putting yourself out there, but like 99% of the time, like people are super nice and friendly, and like honestly, like the comments that like are really mean, it's like so obvious that they're like mean that it's almost like you don't really care what they think because they're just such awful people. So it doesn't really matter. So anyways, yeah.
Yeah, I did that for that blog post too. You're so right. And I've seen so many people do this where they kind of like ask people for advice who both would have a lot to say on that topic, but also have pretty good audiences. So then it will just really help your ideas get distribution after you publish the post, because they know what you're doing. They're very attuned to your message, and they'd help you out and like retweet it or whatever. But another thing that I was going to mention is just the power of expressing gratitude. Like most of the time, the best kind of cold outreach that I've had has just been like there's just something that the person wrote or something in their work that I thought was cool, and I emailed them like being very specific about what I appreciated or what like a thought that was triggered in me on the basis of something they wrote. And then it's genuine, it's like non-transactional, people are very likely to respond. And then from that, like who knows what would happen. Like that's kind of what happened with me with the Annie Duke story. She just had research that I was super into because I'm into like decision making and psychology, and that was like my work at Princeton. And from that, she just spontaneously offered to like kind of be a mentor and give me all this career advice. Or that's like happened in some other cases as well. Like with my personal creative writing on Substack, I tried to write a little bit more regularly this year, and someone emailed me being like, I have a connection to like a book agent. Do you want to pitch something? And that was a person that I was only connected to because of something like this, where I'd like reached out to them and been like, oh, I really appreciate this thing that you wrote, or like this thing that you're doing. Yeah, so it can be like very difficult for people to be like, okay, but how do I cold email someone? Like, what is the purpose of me even reaching out? But this is like the easiest way to. Yeah, for opportunities to say thanks.
Yeah, I like both of those stories. Kind of the way that Linda, you were saying that as you were leaving Coinbase, you were reaching out to people and saying, hey, I want to share my thoughts or kind of share what I'm thinking about. And it's not trying to force a transaction, but it's just trying to like share ideas and begin to build a relationship. And I think similar to the Mishti's story, you're able to sort of react to things that people are already putting out there. So I think one of the things that works well, and the ones that never work well are like sometimes you get these like LinkedIn messages where somebody's just like got some hardcore pitch for something, whether it's like a job or an investment opportunity or something, just like whoa, we just met, like like let's get to know each other a little bit first. Yeah. Whereas when you sort of reach out to people and you sort of say like, hey, like this is what's on my mind, but I'm kind of early and just thinking about stuff, and so I'd love to hear your feedback. I think that kind of thing often works better, and I think it takes a certain amount of courage to say like, I don't really have it all figured out, and I'm trying to figure it out, and I'm reaching out to you as part of that process. So I think that sort of same thing exists in both of those stories. I think there's examples in the gratitude case that Mishti was just mentioning where We were talking about this. This author, Karen Wickrah, wrote a guide to networking, and she talks a lot about how you sort of, as you meet people and go through life and you see things that people post and put out there, you can kind of catalog what people care about, what's top of mind for people, what are the areas that they like to engage or write or talk about. And when you see something relevant to those interest areas, you can actually use that as a moment to be like, hey, I saw this and it made me think of you. Hey, I saw this and this reminded me of this other idea that you had. And it's really, it's genuinely about connecting with people and sharing ideas and discussing. It's not about what you're going to get later, or sort of, it's not like this plotted transactional thing. It's just genuinely like, I want to connect on these ideas. It's like such a great way to do it. So I think it actually takes a lot of courage that you might not recognize in yourself, but having the courage to know, to be comfortable not necessarily having the answer is, I think, an important part of this.
Yeah. I feel like that's why I always ask people when I meet them, like, what are they reading? Or like I try to just like skip the random work talk that I could just Google about them, but just be like, what do you actually care about in life? Like, are you an artist in some way? Like, what is inspiring you these days? And then you'll get something really interesting that you can then, like, both makes you appreciate them, but then you can always get in touch with them afterwards about that. Like, I remember, like, at a Prinko thing, being at this meeting in China with a bunch of VC managers, and like, it felt very formal, but then I just asked this guy like what he was really into reading, and then ended up having this like really just satisfying friendship with him after, where he would just send me like Three Body Problem and all of these like, texts I would have never heard of otherwise, or like Chinese movies that I should watch. And I mean, it's not like that was helpful for me in any sort of tangible way in getting a job next, but it's like those sorts of things that can really help.
Yeah, I really like that you were very proactive about thanking people specifically on like what they did, because I think the cold outreach works really well when it's like catered to that individual versus just like a generic like, hey, like I'm interested in talking to a bunch of people. So yeah, I think those are really good. I also have been trying to be better about following up with people when they like help make an intro or they helped me do something, and being like, hey, like just want to let you know, like, a year ago you like introed me this person and we're actually like working together right now. So thank you for that. Like, I think just like following through on things, just like people love it, like closes the loop and shows that they were like helpful. So yeah, it like helps maintain the relationship too.
Yeah, totally.
I know one of the questions that was posted in chat came from Nate, who we've invited up but haven't really introduced yet. So just welcome, Nate, to the stage. I think you had a question, or you sort of had a comment around connecting with good minds instead of just finding people kind of pumping their numbers.
Yeah, so I'm a startup founder. My co-founder and I left Silicon Valley Bank about a year and a half ago to do a startup, which we love and we're really passionate about. But it's really been weird to move from, Mishti, we were talking about growing from the finance side over to really making something. It's been weird to leave banking, but see my network, which was pretty focused on being at the right events and knowing the right people and kind of working the interior system to get promoted, to startup land, where like if you don't build something that people like it dies. So I wondered from the three of you, but especially for Linda, from what your experience has been, how do you kind of sort through on maybe those DMs where people are like really looking to use you as a stepping stool to get into something versus somebody that you can really connect with on a good mind approach, like Mishti mentioned, of saying like, hey, what are you reading, or what are the tactics you saw as you kind of made that move from Coinbase to what you're doing now? Because we want to build something that people love, but I don't want to be so salesy that I turn people off.
Yeah, I mean, I end up getting like a lot of just DMs because I keep them open. And I like randomly will just post and be like, hey, like my DMs are open. So, I think like what works really well is when people just they approach it like, hey, like I'm really excited about this one area. Like I've worked really hard on, building this product, would love to, and like a brief line about like what it is. I think it would be really valuable to like get to talk to you about it because of like this. And so like why me in particular? that you want to talk to. So like I always find that works really well versus like I can always tell when it's like a generic copy and paste when someone sent it to like a ton of people. So it's kind of like whenever I see that extra effort put in and someone that's really passionate, like I like almost always respond to them. And so I can't always like take a call, but like I'll almost always reply. And so I found that just worked well for me. Like when I was DMing people, just like showing passion and just like not being too pushy or anything.
Very cool. Thanks. This has been really helpful.
Okay. Thanks for the question, Nate. Great. Well, actually back to the audience. I think we had one from Valentine, who's a regular familiar face around our highlighter session. So I wanted to invite Valentine up to ask your question.
So I find myself wondering, given all of this talk about networking and building your brand, how much time do you spend doing this versus anything else that you might be doing related to your job, your life outside of your job, and how does this adjust based on where you are in your career and also what kind of role you're in? And let's keep it within the tech industry.
Yeah, I feel like DK probably also has a really good answer to this.
Yeah, I mean, I think my answer would be that I never feel like I'm networking. I think when people say, the term networking, I think this also sort of, I think it's worth reading Karen Wicker's book on this because it's, I think when I hear about networking, I imagine sort of like people with like, slick back hair and business cards that they're trying to force in your hands. And like, I don't know, that's just never been me.
I have painful memories of college networking.
It almost feels like it's networking theater or something like it's all the things that people describe as networking, but none of the real stuff. And I think the real stuff, is much more, it's like you see somebody, tweeting about something and you want to contribute to the conversation. You want to like ask for further clarification. I mean, I think about these just, I'm never, in like networking mode. I'm just like, oh, that person is, has something interesting to say. Let's, maybe I have some interesting reaction to it, or there's some way that I can sort of dig deeper or probe on it. And so maybe I'll reply to a tweet that somebody sent. Actually, the last few days I replied to this tweet and then somebody actually pulled it and wanted to DM and have a more deep discussion about it. And that was not at all meant to be a networking moment. It was more just meant to like discuss an idea. So I would say almost like if you are allocating time toward networking, my guess is it's going to feel a little more like stilted versus if you are just, meeting people where they are, what's on their mind, what they want to talk about, and try to find, sort of what piques your curiosity in those areas, and can you sort of, pull threads from what they're already expressing interest in.
Yeah, that makes sense. I could see that like at a certain level, and I feel this myself too, being like having it feel a little bit too kind of like omnipresent in a way, like, oh, am I just supposed to be like kind of always be on Twitter and like on the lookout for something interesting that I can pounce on a DM with? And that also gets exhausting, and you're probably not actually being that productive in your like overall career, in the sense of your overall career if you're doing that. So maybe a balance I've been actually thinking recently is kind of have things that you want to learn about or you want to improve, and that requires like you actually just like sitting down and thinking about what you want, probably without your like phone or laptop on. But once you have those goals, like for Linda, maybe you felt like this when you were writing your series, or if there's like a project that that you want to kind of work on, then it might be a little bit easier to be like, okay, I'm gonna every morning, like I've thought of like a couple thought leaders who are relevant to this, and then you sort of like construct it around those goals, if that makes any sense. Because sometimes I do feel like there's so many people out there, and like there's so many people you could be reaching out to, and it's also undefined. But like especially if I before when I was in the job search, it's like, okay, but what's the balance between like concretely doing things and like planning versus letting serendipity arise? I think that's an interesting and sometimes tricky balance.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely hard. I'm similar to DK in that like I've never thought about it as networking. Like I'm also like I'm like quite shy, like so I don't do well in like big group settings where like you don't know people and you just kind of like approach people. So I kind of just do what's I think like works best for me, and like I cater to myself, and that like I kind of just reach out to people I'm genuinely interested in like what they're writing about or what they've built, and kind of go from there. And it's mostly like one-on-one conversations for me, like, and I try to like build kind of the deeper connections there. And then like as far as like building brand, like that was a very foreign concept to me. Like I like wasn't on Twitter up until like right when I started writing my blog posts, and people were like encouraging me to like go on Twitter and like post it there. Yeah, I think that like building brands is strange, but it's kind of like for me, I wanted to just be authentic, and like people can always tell when it's like you're trying to build a brand, like and sometimes those posts like come across like it can be really cringy for some people, honestly, and I think that like your brand, like you want to just be authentic to yourself. These are actually things you're really interested in and that you're sharing. These are actually things that you think would be useful. Like this is content that you're putting out there because you want to get feedback and you want to educate people. Like I think those are the most organic ways to build brands. So that's kind of how I've approached it mostly.
Cool. Does that answer your question, Valentine?
Absolutely. That's super insightful. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Thanks for joining us. All right.
I should have a question for you, DK, and also Linda, that I think might be useful for people to hear more about. But like, we're kind of talking from the perspective of people who've been trying to create their own career. Like, how do you network? How do you get in touch with the right people? But what does it feel like to be on the other side as like DK, someone who's hired a lot of people for your startup, and then Linda for your fund as well? Now you're in a position where you probably get a lot of inbound. So what makes someone really stand out, and kind of how has your perspective changed seeing it from both sides of the table?
Yeah, I mean, I would almost say it's really the same. It's all the same themes, right? So it's people who have. I mean, people should really read your blog post because it shows exactly how you and I were beginning our discussion. It's actually right up there on the internet, posted the WhatsApp chat. So it's it is, I think, very much like I read the chat and it's like, okay, Mishti cares about what we're doing, right? And of course that's like something that I want to dig in on because I care about what we're doing, right? So it's just such an easy. It doesn't feel like you're being cheesy or like technical. It feels like it's like a great opportunity to connect. So I think it just it's very, I don't want to say like very symmetric whether you're sort of in the kind of operator joining versus kind of hiring manager position. You really just you want to connect with people. I think the one thing that I would say around kind of like brands and hiring is I think people oftentimes have because of writing, they could end up having a brand that is almost like that is like a differentiator in an operational role. So you think about people who have sort of had some experience in a certain category of expertise, like maybe it's around like online marketing or growth or like customer success or operational excellence. There's a lot of things that people have or design, obviously engineering, there's a lot of good writing and people. So people build like these brands that are, in a sense, almost larger than life. And I think a hiring manager who sees, somebody who's out there and built a brand and really, they care deeply about like this topic. And now, I feel flattered they're coming to talk to me and spend time, and I get to learn from them because they've obviously, if you write a lot, not only are you out there sharing your ideas, but it's obvious as if anybody who's done any amount of writing online, it's obvious that you also put yourself at the center of a bunch of inbound interesting ideas. So I just know I'm going to learn something by having that meeting. And that always, that's always exciting to know that, maybe it's like, this is the person who has all this experience network around growth. And I know I'm just going to have an interesting conversation where I'm going to come away having learned something. And then, maybe I'm going to, maybe it's a fit or not. And then maybe there's somebody else in their network who I would want to connect with. And so, those brands I think are also useful in the kind of like hiring manager kind of operator context.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think that the blog post you wrote, Mishti, was so good. I think highly recommend everyone read that. It also just when you what really I thought was powerful was that Google Doc that you shared with DK that was here are the things that I as a user or as someone who really likes this product, here are ways that I can improve, here are thoughts I have. I thought that's really powerful because it shows passion and initiative. And I just remember also when we were first meeting, when I was putting on the first book club through Highlighter, it was my first experience, and you just made the process so easy, and you had it all organized in this Google Doc. And I think just showing that initiative is just really just is kind of makes you stand out from a lot of people who kind of do copy paste type of outreach. And so what works really well for me is when someone's really taking that initiative. I have people reach out that are hey, I remember Zach Siegel, who's now at Coinbase. The way I met him was he messaged me and was hey, I really liked your blog posts. I actually recorded them verbally and put them in podcast format, and,
cool.
And I put it on my website. And so for people that aren't able to read it, and I was oh my gosh, that's amazing. And that's how we connected. And I have people do where they're yeah, I saw you give this talk about this, and I specifically have been exploring that area, and will share a whole thing with me about their thoughts on it. So it's just that catered initiative is every time someone does something like that, it just really stands out to me, and I'm very responsive to people like that.
Yeah, also it demonstrates that somebody actually cares. You can't scalably care about everything. So if you deeply care about this, you can't really fake that, right? It's just, you kind of have to be authentic. It's the only way.
Yeah. But also, it's not always going to work. I sent product notes like that to a couple of people. Not a ton, but I did send product notes like that to other people whose things that I really cared about. And I either didn't get a response, or someone was just oh, thanks for your thoughts, and never heard back from them. So just also want to emphasize that most of the time this stuff might not work, but then really the one time it does is what matters. And I almost see it as a funnel. You do a ton of cold outreach. It's 1% of, not 1%, but there's a small fraction of things that work out, but then it opens up a huge funnel again. Because after I unlocked a couple people to engage with me, that's when I got so many warm intros.
Yep.
So I wasn't dangling on the hope of someone answering my cold thing anymore, but they had a ton of friends, and now they respected me, and it was so much easier to get into conversations after that. So even the most thoughtful, genuine outreach often won't get answered, but it's still worth it.
That's a good point. It is. I mean, like a lot of things in technology, there's a lot of asymmetry to it. So the cost to send a single DM is extremely low. The upside potential of a single DM could change your life. And so the fact that you send 5 or 10 that you've carefully crafted that are roughly free, or maybe it takes 5 or 10 minutes of your time, that's almost free basically, compared to the life-changing, you meet a person that you become lifelong thought partners with. That actually can happen on the internet today. It's kind of amazing. And so I think the asymmetric upside is like a kaleidoscope. It happens everywhere, in portfolio management or technology products or, creation products. There's all kinds of, examples of it. So it sort of does, telescope in a sense. So yeah, I think that's good. I wanted we invited up Narek. I think Mishti, you had a
which is first of all, it's so nice to see you. We actually went to college together, and I feel like we haven't talked in ages. So this is amazing.
Oh, welcome.
Great hearing your stories. Thanks for putting this up, and it's there I heard some good stuff. So it's been interesting being part of this. And I was just wondering, like, a lot of what you share, people will resonate and will put a mental note that they should do it, but very few actually end up doing it. I was wondering what motivates you to do what you are doing. On a related note, that when Mishti, you say like most of the time you don't get a response, how do you keep going? How did you keep going when you didn't get these responses?
Yeah, I think really just realizing or like feeling for myself that when I did get a couple responses, it just felt so good, and like honestly, so much was unlocked from there. So I'm sure there would have been a point where if I totally was hitting a wall and like absolutely nothing was working, like that would have been really hard. But I do feel like, especially I feel like for a lot of people here, you like everyone has alumni networks, you probably have friends and family who like know people who know people. Like it's not it's not as huge of a reach as you might think at first. Even just starting with like the network closest to you. And then I think that it's like just the most delightful thing. Like this week I published an essay on my personal Substack, and a bunch of people sent me back things that the essay made them think of, like other pieces of writing. And it's just been so delightful, like emailing or messaging the people who wrote those other pieces and being like, hey, like this really struck me, and I actually just wrote something about the same topic, which was like the death of a close mentor in my case. And I shared my stuff with them, and it just feels so good, like that human connection when it does happen. So I think, yeah, just like realizing the compounding gains to your own like career and development, but also just in the moment, it's like, especially these days when no one's really meeting in person, such a nice way to just connect with another human being. But I feel you on this stuff being really non-traditional, no deadlines, and like I think Hardik said in chat, I think he got it exactly right, where it's like it starts with genuine curiosity and eventually leads to what people think of as networking, but it's a very ambiguous and like undefined process. So it's difficult to be sitting somewhere and being like, I really don't like my job and I want to move as soon as possible. And then like set off this chain reaction of things that might work in like a month for you to find a new thing or might take a year. It's like, I do think that is difficult and something you were alluding to. I don't know if DK and Linda, you have thoughts on this.
DK?
Sure. Yeah, I think you do want to start early with whatever you're doing. So don't try to start when you want something or what you want some outcome. I think start today, and just find interesting people or things to talk to. Interesting people to talk to about the things they're writing. But I think it is. I think it is hard to do on a schedule. It's if I sort of think about all of the good fortune I've had to connect with this set of people, I can trace back, decades of this like non-networking stuff and these like happenstance relationships that come about, because somebody's interested in the same thing, and then you go plan a little chance to hang out and you get a group of people together. I mean, pre-COVID days. But I think those things, I think people imagine that there's more structure to how you solve these problems. And I think the main thing I would suggest is like, it's extraordinarily unstructured, but the internet has given us the ability to allow serendipity to happen, to help create amazing new connections that are unstructured. So I think if you sort of were to rewind the world, to like 20 years ago or 40 years ago, probably like the world that maybe our parents grew up in, there were like much more structured there are career paths, and there are like the proper ways to make friends through school, or the proper ways to, find new ideas at the library. There are all these kind of ways that things were done that almost might seem foreign to us today, just because like there's so many new ways. There's like, infinite ways to connect with infinite ideas on the internet. We sort of have this plenty, but like the actual mechanics of how you get started, there's not necessarily like, there's not like just a there's not a playbook for it. So before it was easy, right? In a sense, it was easy. Sort of like you can run the playbook and you can kind of, your outcome is like, success. And I think today that playbook is kind of getting reinvented and remixed every 6 months. So it's not really something that you can just anchor on and execute, which I think gets to a broader point that we sort of touched on a little bit, but we've discussed, previously, which is how much of the world do you try to kind of structure into the way you want it to be versus how much do you sort of like listen and try to adapt and figure out where is their energy. And that's like, where is their energy from other people? And what do you have energy for? Like, are you excited about this thing? If it feels like it's a grind, if it feels like it's a drag, if you're not enjoying it, likely is the other people that you're either trying to work with or trying to engage in that also feel like it's a little bit of a grind. And if that's not the case, if they love it and you don't, then go find something where you love it and they love it, right? So I think, the sense of like needing to find structure and climb in these structured kind of paths, I think is a little bit of like not fully anachronistic, but it's like a historical idea. And I think if you sort of say, look, we're all people, we all want to connect with people, we want to connect on ideas, and we all want to carve our paths to accomplish different things. I think if you sort of take that perspective, then you're really opening yourself up, and you're not trying to control it. You're just like opening yourself up to the energy around you.
Yeah, I think those are all like great points. I mean, for me, like definitely did so many like cold outreach where I just like didn't get responses. I think like for me, it's just like helpful to think of everything is just like a learning experience. Like I really like everything, every time you like send that DM and like no, like people don't respond, it's like, is there like a way that maybe this is not coming across like in a way that people don't respond, or, like always try to like view things as learning experience, and that like keeps me really motivated because like I always want to see like how I can improve something. And for me, like I also like I did set like mini, because I actually am someone that like I do like structure like in my day-to-day. So like for me, I would set like little goals, like I would say like so when I started writing my blog posts, I actually had a one blog post per month goal, and I said I would do that for 1 year. And I felt like at least like around me was chaos, but there was like something I found like a little bit of structure in, which helped me personally. And so I like just kind of did that cadence, and it made me feel like I was working towards like something, creating like a series or something.
Yeah, and I mean, Narek is a PhD student in CS at Berkeley, and like academia is probably like another example, especially being a PhD student. Like you have a lot of years to produce something, unclear how, that's kind of up to you. Like you have to figure out what your problem is and like who you're going to work with for that. So it sounds like very much kind of like a similar context that you
in many ways it is similar, and it's great hearing all of your thoughts on it and see how others approach it, and actually talk with people who also think about issues like this. So it's been great. Thanks for the thoughts.
Great. Thanks for joining us, Narek. Cool. So I do want to be sensitive to the time because I know we're sort of at the hour. It sort of flew by, but we're kind of at the hour that we had originally discussed spending some time together. So we should wrap soon, but it does feel like there's a lot of energy and kind of there's questions coming up in the chat, and we have our own sort of that I prepared with Mishti. We've got some from before. One of the ones I think that I'm particularly curious about is kind of how friends and family react when they hear about these kind of alternative paths. So, I think about some of the experiences I've had, and sort of, I think it's never, my parents grew up in a different world, and I think they didn't always have as much context on why I would be making the choices, but my friend network, it seemed obvious to them. They sort of really understood it. And I wonder, have you had similar experiences, or do you feel like you have, kind of family that understands, or do you have open discussions or, explain it to them, and do people finally get it, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, especially for Linda, I'm curious because if like crypto was such a like shady thing, as you said when you were.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one was a tricky one. Family, like my parents are immigrants from China. Definitely wanted the like more traditional path for me. The way I phrased it to them was like, "Hey, this is like something I'm really passionate about, and I'm really lucky in that like I do have like an education and I do like already have work experience, and that in the worst case this fails, I can start over and like it'll be okay, and I'm young." So I kind of phrased it as like it'll all be okay, like like I can always go back to this career. Like I told them like if this doesn't work out, like I'll go back to traditional finance and I'll probably get my MBA. Like I distinctly remember like that career path that I talked to them about. So that they gradually became more comfortable because it was kind of like let's see how this goes. My boyfriend at the time, now husband, was super supportive. He was actually like probably one of the most important people to really help me think outside of just a traditional career path. He was just like seeing how I wasn't that challenged or being that creative at AIG, and he would always say like he would always just like push like I think that like there's other opportunities, and so he was really helpful with that. And then my finance friends were like really like, what are you doing? Like you're throwing away your career. And then my like just kind of friends growing up, like they're really supportive. They're like, yeah, follow what you want to do. So it was like honestly such a mixed reaction. But the part that made me really happy was when I told my manager at AIG that I was leaving to join Coinbase, and that they were a Bitcoin company. He was really supportive. Like he was like, wow, like I was not expecting that, but I really like respect that you're going after something you're passionate about. Like you're young, like you should be doing that kind of stuff and taking that risk. So he was supportive, and after that I just felt like it was like the right thing to do. So yeah, ton of mixed reactions.
Yeah, that resonates with me too, because I feel like people who care about you really want you, they want you to be happy, and they want some sort of like security also. And I think the interesting thing about this whole approach of like creating your own career, or like kind of carving a path, especially in a non-traditional industry, is that I feel like a lot of the times it is way less risky than people are used to thinking about, because how are you defining risk? Like for me as a really early career person, for example, like I feel like there is only upside to being in a startup job like I am in right now with Highlighter. Like I'm learning a ton. I'm meeting a lot of really smart, interesting people, which arguably matters more than anything else. And I could, like, I mean, if I could have a traditional job before, why not after? Like, if I really had my back against the wall and wanted and needed to go back, as Linda was saying, like, you could get an MBA, you could kind of pivot. So, like, really, what are you losing out on by making this sort of move? And I think people are just maybe a little less accustomed to thinking in that sense, but I mean, even with my parents, I think like once we talked about it in that way, it wasn't really an issue, because it just feels like a win-win. Like you'll be much happier. Plus you're doing something that's good for your career overall, and not like it's not like a starving artist situation where there's huge downsides to failing, or like a huge change in quality of life or anything like that.
Right. It kind of reminds me of I think the startup career path, I think people who are sometimes outside of it look at it as like an extremely risky proposition compared to kind of a more traditional institution. But I actually think there's a totally opposite framing you could take, which is, any given startup may not succeed, but the experience you have, the people that you meet, actually create this like anti-fragility to kind of the next thing. There's always going to be something that humanity wants, right? And so something new to be built, something that you can build that like doesn't exist yet. And if you develop in yourself kind of the skills to look for that, to find it, the networks of people to connect with, to figure those things out together, those kinds of things, actually make your career less risky while improving the upside opportunities of, bigger impact and better, more fluid, vibrant networks and maybe more interesting ideas and creative people. You get sort of the best of both worlds, but you just have to reframe because there's an idea that maybe an existing institution provides more stability, and it may be, in cases, but I think there's also a certain stability from the anti-fragility that, the kind of the ecosystem of building new things for people and connecting with the people who are building. So that's some other kind of final thoughts. I know we are kind of over time. I just want to check in if there's any other final thoughts or ideas that we didn't get to that you were excited to talk about.
I think like the thread in everything that we've talked about that I think is just really important to maybe like summarize or say again is just the importance of being very people-centric in whatever kind of career search or overall design that you're embarking on, and then also letting yourself be exposed to serendipity like as much as possible, which they go hand in hand. Like the more you surround yourself with good people and are kind of attuned to what they're thinking and writing about, the more you can connect with them on that, and then that'll spark like serendipitous ideas and opportunities. So I think those two things are just probably the foundation for like anything that I've found useful in my own job search or like admired about how other people have crafted their own careers.
Great. Anything to add to that, Linda?
I totally agree. I mean, it's it's really hard to plan so far out. Like when I was in college, like Bitcoin wasn't like even a thing. Like it like got created like right when I started, and so like there's so many like trajectories in life that like just kind of just have to be open-minded to, and you can't necessarily like plan out like far in advance.
Yeah, that's great. Well, this has been awesome. I'm so glad we got a chance to all hang out and talk and get some more people involved in the discussion. We do have one final question that we like to ask as we do our sessions. But before we close that, I want to make just a few quick announcements. So we've got a few upcoming discussions scheduled right now. One is tomorrow afternoon. We got a lunch session at noon where we'll be talking to Li Jin about the passion economy, and she just wrote a new piece about kind of the building the middle class for the creator economy. So that's lunchtime tomorrow at noon. So come on by for that. And then we're talking to Lenny Rachitsky on January 7th, where we're talking about some of his recent work on kind of a grand unified theory of startup growth. So those are a couple of scheduled ones. We're actually going to have a bunch of other ones in between time. So stay tuned. You can always find it at highlighter.com/discover, and that'll have listing all of our upcoming shows. So the question we like to conclude with, we sort of have spent a lot of time, I was asking the two of you, our featured guest, questions, and we've had a bunch of other questions come up from the audience. And so now we like to turn the tables and give you a chance to ask us a question or ask the world at large a question. And so really this is, what's on your mind these days? What are the things that sort of, maybe it keeps you up at night, maybe it's the thing that piques your curiosity, but what are the things, what are the questions you would sort of leave out to the world right now?
Mine are like all just crypto questions, but
Sure.
I do like, I really believe that crypto is going to be really important and help like bridge a lot of people across borders and just make everything more efficient. I guess like it just feels like it's not the most approachable area, and I know a lot of people get like intimidated a bit by it or dismiss it because they think it's like a scam or whatever. So I guess like I'm always thinking about like, what do you feel is needed to make crypto more accessible as an area? Like just products or like content, like what can kind of push that forward. So always curious to hear how people think about that.
Great, yeah. That seems like an important question.
Yeah, I feel like I've never had to think about this question because we always ask other people to answer it, and I actually didn't prepare an answer for this session. But
that's all right. We sort of pulled it on Linda last minute too. So,
but one this is like a very zoom out question, but maybe it relates to a little bit to what we were talking about before. But I've been thinking about how coming out of college, there's this huge kind of like focus and obsession that I and many of my classmates have had around like impact. Like, let's make as much impact as possible. And how can we just like skip as many levels as we can and like do the hardest hitting thing for the world?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've been thinking more and more about kind of the balance between thinking at such kind of like planned higher level macro at a macro scale, and just thinking about those questions in terms of like individuals and very small scale learning, and basically like, should I just be spending a lot more time engaging with my neighborhood and local community and like honing in narrower and narrower, instead of like starting so broad and having these ambitions for like broad-based change without really knowing what's going on in my immediate circle. And also, I think it's an interesting question how this is changing and will change in the future, because a lot of people cannot interact with their local communities in a physical way right now. So like, what will be the future of how that plays out? It's a bit long-winded, but
no, that's great. That's great. Well, thank you both for joining us, and thanks for sharing your wisdom and your personal story and your questions for us. We'll probably put them up on Twitter, or we'll put them up in the newsletter kind of afterwards, so we can discuss further if people have ideas on that. So we'll talk about kind of cryptocurrencies and what is needed for people to get more educated about it or understand products or problems or content, and then we'll kind of have the big thoughts from Mishti about community. How do you actually go from the wide scope to the more narrow? All right, this has been so much fun. Thanks again for taking the time to spend with us. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thanks,
we'll
everyone.
see you soon.
Bye.